I discuss Vaknin's lecture on the relation between the self and the I, and I bring that in relation to Stirner's concept of the I in relation to Hegel's concept of the spirit from Jena lectures. Vaknin's lecture that I'm referring to is called Personality, Fact or Fiction, Self, Traits and Types. Consider these passages in Max Stirner. I am truly both the human and inhuman in one, for I am human and at the same time more than human. That is, I am the I of this mere attribute of mine. End quote. Therefore, according to Stirner, there is in the individual always something which is irreducible to his traits. This reminded me of when Vaknin asked the question, who is the I in the statements like, I quote, I am sad, I am happy. Who is it or what is it that is saying, myself is proud or sad? Another quote from Stirner. The core of the state is indeed the human under quotation marks, within quotation marks, this unreality, and it itself is merely, quote, human society. The world that the believer, the believing spirit creates is called the church. The world that the human or humane spirit creates is called the state. But that is not my world. I never perform anything human in the abstract, but always something my own. That is, my human act is distinct from every other human act and is only real through this distinction, as it is an act which belongs to me. The human in it is an abstraction, and as such, it is spirit, that is, an abstract being. End quote. In the preceding quote, we find the salient theme running through Stirner's main work, which is that the individual, who he calls in German der Einzige, which means the only one, or we could also say the unique one, although literally it means the only one, is not reducible to that which is by society or according to any scientific concept, ideological or religious doctrine or any philosophical teaching considered human. I find especially thought-provoking his view of the, quote, human as a, quote, unreality, in German Unwirklichkeit. That reminds me of the well-known passage in Hegel on the subject as the, quote, night of the world. But before that, the preceding passage and my part translation, part interpretation of it. Consider what precedes the night of the world passage in Hegel's Jena Schriften, Jena writings. This quote is from A Philosophy of Spirit, written in 1805 to 1806. Jena Lectures, part of Jena Lectures, chapter A, Intelligence. I quote, in perceiving, the spirit is the image. For him as consciousness, he is a being, separated from the I. But for us, he is the unity of both. This becomes, for the spirit itself, he is in and for itself. In perceiving, he is only in itself. He completes this through the for itself, through the negativity, separation of the in itself, and goes back into itself. And his first self is to him an object, the image, the being as mine, as sublated. This image belongs to him. He is in possession of it. He is master of it. It is stored in his treasure, in his night. It is unconscious. That is, without being exposed as an object to the representation. Now follows my part translation, part interpretation of the above passage. Actually, already I read it in translation. So it would be interpretation of the above passage. In our conscious perception, our spirit or self is one of the representations. For the spirit as consciousness, or in other words, for the consciousness aspect or function of the spirit, it, spirit or self, is a being which is separate from the I, that is, the ego. But for the individual, it is perceived as united with it. Consider Freud's claim that the consciousness as an, I quote, organ directed to the external world, end quote, is always connected to a part of the ego, which part, for that reason, necessarily remains unperceived. This quote is from Heinz Kohut's work, The Search for the Self. So, the consciousness as an aspect of the self is always connected to a part of the ego, according to Freud. That would explain why the individual, in his natural unreflected stance, perceives its self, or spirit, and the ego as united, as one. Hence, people's unreflected, self-understandable use of expressions like I am worried, proud, or happy, as in myself is worried, proud, happy. Without the problematization, nor even the consciousness of the relation between the speaker saying that and the object of those statements. My answer to Vaknin's question, who is the observer of the self, is consciousness is the observer of the self. And the answer to the question, who is it that is saying those statements, I am happy, proud, and so on, is ego, or the I, is saying those statements. But since consciousness is an aspect or a function that is a function of the self, it is actually the self which is aware of itself. The self is, in observing itself, both the subject and object. It is then self-consciousness, in German Selbstbewusstsein. The self is self-relating negativity. This, namely the self as self-relating negativity, is, by the way, the main theme of Slavoj Žižek's huge book, Less Than Nothing, called Less Than Nothing, which is dedicated largely to Hegel's notion of the self. I continue. But this observer of the self, namely the consciousness, is an observer which is always partially connected to the ego, or the I, and therefore an observer which cannot be entirely objective. Hence, the individual can never completely and fully objectively perceive himself or himself. For the self is in itself and for itself, but for the perception it is at first only in itself. Through the separation done by the work of the power of negation, from the in itself it attains for itself. That is, it itself enters the area of its perception, after which it appears to itself as its own object, as an image, that is a representation, as the sublated my being. It belongs to it and is kept, quote, in its night. Why this so-called night? Because now it is so in an unconscious way. Hegel says, es ist bewusstlos, which means it is conscious-less. That is, without any longer being presented as an object to the perception. This image belongs to the self, it is the owner of it. And then comes Hegel's well-known passage about the night of the world. I quote, the human being is this night, this empty nothing, that contains everything in its simplicity, a wealth of unendingly many representations, images, of which none come to him currently, or which are not existing as present. This, the night, the interior of nature, that exists here, pure self, in phantasmagorical representations, is night all around it, in which here shoots a bloody head, there another white ghastly apparition suddenly here before it, and just so disappear. One catches sight of this night when one looks human beings in the eye, into a night that becomes awful, as the night of the world hangs opposite to one here. End quote. Remember Stirner referring to the human as an unreality, and that the I is not reducible to its attributes because it cannot be reduced to them, as it is the I of the attribution itself. That is the empty nothing Hegel talks about here, but that empty nothing yet contains in potentiality an infinite amount of representations and thoughts. The night of the world, that would be the irreducibility of the self, the endless abyss of subjectivity. I conclude with a concluding short paragraph in Stirner's main work. I quote, "In the only one, even the owner returns to his own creative nothingness from which he is born. Any higher being above me, be it God or humanity, weakens the sense of my uniqueness and pales in comparison to the light of this consciousness. If I place my cause upon myself, the only one, then it rests upon the transient, the mortal creator of it, who consumes itself, and I may say, I have set my cause upon nothing." Enter Vaknin's philosophy of nothingness.